Where are we now? So we can do competitive testing as long as we're using the synthetic stuff. You can't, at least we haven't found a way to put a beacon on our competitor pages. We'd love for them to be able to do that. Maybe we'll build an ad network or something so we can, sneak them in that way or something. But for the most part, the only way that you can compare yourself against your competition is through synthetic testing. And, it sells really well. Usually you're going to be wanting to hold yourself as a benchmark against your competitors or your businesses anyway. And those are generally only available after builds have been pushed to staging at least. More likely than not after they're only on production, unless you've opened up firewalls and whatever else to allow the testing systems to come back. So they're definitely not catching things in the dev process, unless you're running private agents inside of your network, at which point you can do some of that kind of stuff. Okay, so Ray's point was that you can do RUM testing against the competitor as well by loading their script in your page.
In their context.
Yeah, but so do you do that for visitors that are visiting? Let's say I visit Microsoft.com. Are you loading Apple.com in an iframe and executing? Right, but when you say normal test, that's a synthetic test, right? It's not users visiting.
Whatever test.
Right, but so when I'm talking about RUM, I mean normal user traffic. It's not test traffic. It's people browsing my site.
For RUM, that's different. You're
right. Right. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, the point is for RUM, theoretically, you could load your competitor's page in an iframe, measure it. Maybe it's a way to DOS your competitor. I don't know. You probably don't want to. I can't imagine the lawyers would be too happy either. I'm sure something ugly would happen. But if you really wanted to test it, you could probably load your competitor's page in an iframe and figure it out. Of course, then you also run the risk of your competitor figuring out how to bust out of the iframe and take over your page, and all of a sudden you're serving your competitor's page. But so when I say you can't, I really mean you shouldn't. There's no good way to test RUM for your competitors. In a lab, you can test it either synthetically, or there's a bunch of ways that you can test your competitor's page when you're running the synthetic tests, even on mobile. One of the bigger problems you're going to notice, even when you get billions of page views a month, the noise on the data for RUM is difficult to deal with. You get all sorts of crazy variations. You get variations based on time of day. Are people at home or are people at work? Are people browsing for Europe? Are people browsing from the US? When all of the data starts getting mashed together, if you squint just right and you pull out the right aggregations, you can kind of make a straight line out of it, unless it's a holiday, right? And the holidays don't happen on the same days every year, and the traffic causes all sorts of weird things to happen. So it's really, you have to do a lot of filtering. Usually it's like, okay, what does my US daytime traffic look like compared to yesterday kind of thing for your real user measurement? So, even the real user stuff still isn't perfect. And yeah. The reason I say opportunity next to no competitive performance is, once again, if any of you have any sway, dollars, with Omniture, ComScore, et cetera, they have their stuff on enough pages that you could probably convince them it would be in their worthwhile to add performance tracking and to let you buy the performance data of your competitors, or at least in an industry way. So you can say, hey, my performance falls into this span relative to the industry. So I'm hoping, yes?
Isn't that what Chrome's for?
Isn't that what Chrome's for? How so? So Chrome won't tell you that.
50% of the user traffic starts to go to Chrome, Google, you have a good idea what's.
Okay, so the question was, if Chrome is 50% of the traffic, couldn't Google just tell us that? Yeah, not so much. Mostly there's a lot of privacy stuff around data. And the users opt in to sharing some data to make the browsers better, not so much for generally distributing their performance data and all that kind of stuff. We do share aggregate information, like at Velocity in June, for analytics as well, right? So analytics is on a good 50% of the web. I'm making that number up, but I think it's reasonably accurate. And we do share aggregate information about how the performance is going in general. But it's also sort of not the business, but there's all sorts of pain points around that. I'm hoping that we can convince the companies that do it for a business, that do the analytics and sell you the traffic information about your partners, to also start caring about performance as well. And that's sort of the one big opportunity in that space.
New Relic gives you a benchmark against the industry.
So New Relic gives you a benchmark against the industry. I'm assuming the other people in the industry are also running New Relic. And sort of back to the on-load versus DOM content ready, I think the New Relic tracks 3 or 4 different front-end metrics. Unfortunately, we don't have a good way to standardize on things that are better on the front end. But yeah, so if your competitors are also running New Relic, that's a way to, even not necessarily your competitors, but get an idea of where you stand benchmark-wise against other people. So there are inroads starting to be made in that space, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, because that's the biggest thing that I hear back is, yeah, I can track my performance against myself. Yeah, it's really noisy, but the business really cares. How am I doing compared to Bob down the street, right? So getting it further into your pipeline, you can get your synthetic testing integrated directly in with your build process to try and catch stuff before it happens, goes out to staging, out to production. There's a bunch of different solutions. Phantom has a bunch of performance capabilities with it. NetSniff is sort of the proverbial will generate a HAR. It's not too bad in general. And there are a bunch of scripts that integrate that with Jenkins or Travis and a whole bunch of other CI integrations. So whatever you're using for your build system, you can hopefully plug it right in. Marcel from Twitter open sourced a wrapper. It's an NPM wrapper for the web page test API to integrate it. And he also has a bunch of helpers for integrating with various CI solutions as well. So you can integrate, if you're doing it as part of your build, a private instance of web page test running inside of your firewall integrated with your build system, and start pulling out the various metrics. And there are a bunch of ways to trend and graph this data. The HTTP archive, it's kind of been hacked as a way to run a private way of trending performance. It wasn't sort of originally designed that way. Hopefully we can make it better. It's on our goals to make it better. But you can do it. People have done it. You can trend with a private HTTP archive instance, and it'll test your pages and whatever on a regular basis. I believe Jonathan is going to be showing off some other ways to integrate with Graphite and some other stuff to be able to trend your automation. He'll be doing that. Is that tomorrow? Wednesday. In here. Well, not this room, but at the conference. Show Slow probably doesn't get enough props. Sergey, are you in here? Over there, Sergey created Show Slow. It's a way, originally it was for tracking your Y-Slow scores and that kind of stuff as part of regular recurring testing. It has a way to schedule runs as well. You can also integrate web page tests with Show Slow and track your performance and other scores over time. And last one, it's probably new to most of you because we only open sourced it about a week ago, TSViewDB. It's something we released from Google that can integrate. It's mostly a trending and graphing type solution for integrating with continuous build. It'll let you see, so it'll draw the solid lines for the medians or whatever percentile, and then you'll get a fuzzy line around the outside so you can see how noisy the results are. You can trend it over time or over builds. You can go back from individual builds and link back to the full results in web page test. Actually, you will be able to when I release the next release of web page test, hopefully in the next week or so, that has the integration for TSViewDB. It also has a pretty cool regression detection system built into it that can deal with the noise that you typically see from continuous integration testing. And at least in the testing that we've done, we haven't seen it generate a whole lot of false negatives or false positives. When it alerts you that there's been a regression, usually you'll see something like one of those lines happening, even in noisy data. And I think, I'm probably going to get you out to lunch way earlier, but the main point I wanted to make, and I wanted you all to sort of take back with you, is whatever you measure is what people are going to optimize for. And it's not just your dev teams, right? So if you hold a dev team accountable for the onload time, they're going to find a way to make the onload time faster. They'll do it the right way at first. They'll do their best that they can. But then you'll start seeing things like, I'm going to load all of my page content after onload, right? Which is great. They got their onload time. They met their annual goal. And it crap for the user, right? It actually makes the user experience a lot worse. If you measure an ops team, for example, against the onload time, and you're going to get things like the CDN evaluations where, especially if you measure them against their onload times measured from a backbone synthetic test, if that's the criteria you're holding the team accountable for, they're going to optimize for that, right? So they're going to pick the solution that gives you the best synthetic performance from a backbone. So unless you have users sitting in those backbone test locations, it's not going to help your business at all. You want to, as best as you can, tie the goals to the business metrics, but if you can't do that, still try and tie everything to the actual user experience. I think, Justin.
Yes, so this web page test is I consider it kind of a hybrid between synthetic and RUM, because all the web page test POPs, aren't they just at people's houses, like Aaron Peters, it's like underneath his desk? So it's like last mile is kind of real.
So the question was, considers web page test kind of a hybrid between synthetic and real because of the POPs, the test agents are running in random people's houses, which is semi-true. Actually, most of the test POPs are running in hosted centers for the most part. Even the one that's running in Dulles, which technically is running out of my basement. Yes, even the web server is still running out of my basement. It's on a fiber line, so it's not really end user. The main thing that web page test gives you is the traffic-shaped last mile connections. So when you run a test, unless you try really hard and you go and say run it at native connection speed, if you take any of the defaults, right now it'll default to a cable connection profile. Back when it was originally created, we were usually running tests for DSL traffic-shaped profiles. That was really the main innovation that web page test delivered on, was doing synthetic testing with end-user-like connections. So they behave just like end-user connections, even though they're not sitting in end-user locations. But it gives you the flexibility to test what would this look like at 3G, what would this look like at cable or DSL. To that point, it's a hybrid between a last mile and a backbone agent. It's a cheaper way to run last mile agents in backbone type facilities. Straight ahead, right under all the bright lights.
Do any of the navigation timing API events in any defensible way correlate with time to first byte or start render?
So do any of the navigation timing events correlate in any way, shape, or form to anything useful for the user experience? First byte, start render, anything like that. So the big win with the navigation timing was really in the stuff that you get before anything is delivered. So navigation timing gave us the DNS times, the socket connect times, and the first byte times. Anything after that, it didn't really add a whole lot of value. We don't have to use JavaScript anymore to instrument a lot of the stuff, but it didn't give us anything new user experience-wise. IE does have the MS First Paint event. Don't use it. I ran a bunch of tests. So I actually expose MS First Paint now as part of web page tests as well, just in case you're interested to see what it looks like when it happens. The first paint ends up usually happening after the HTML arrives, but before anything in the head's been processed, before JavaScript's been run. So it's the first paint of a blank white page. So if you care about when that happens, by all means, but you're just about as well measuring the first byte time, and that's a lot more consistent in across browsers. Your real best bet, and unfortunately there's no standardized way to do it. Maybe we can come up with a convention like, okay, we'll throw things in user timing, and anything that has something like this we're going to call above the fold, and we can all agree on that. And then maybe some third party like the Google Analytics or something will be able to pull and synthesize an above the fold time from that. But there aren't anything else you get DOM content ready and onload basically are the only two things that you get out of navigation timing. And neither one of those, they're both technical browser measurements, right? It's when did it reach the end of the HTML? How long did it take to execute that JavaScript? When did it load everything that was described in the HTML? And how long did that take? And I know Steve's just jumping out of his chair to yell at me about something.
No, I'm going to give you a leading question. So if there isn't anything in nav timing now, we know speed index is a great metric that's in web page test. Is there any chance of getting something like that in the future in browsers for RUM?
Okay, so Steve was asking, is there any hope to get something more like speed index in the browsers in RUM? There's hope. So I was naive. I emailed out the W3C timing group and said, hey, I'm going to throw in information about paint rects. I'm technically on the Chrome team. I'm sure I can get this done, right? Let's get this in the spec. Let's expose paint rects. Damn, I got shot down quick. So it turns out exposing paint information has the potential to expose history sniffing attacks. So it's one of those things where I constantly curse the bad guys because they keep us from having anything good. So history sniffing is a problem. Browsers have been trying to avoid it various ways. They eliminated the ability to query the visited or the color based on visited state for CSS elements because that was a hack. So they weren't too excited about me exposing a new vector for it. Because you could do something like you could put in a whole bunch of links on the page, apply a visited style to one of the links, and wait and see if it painted or not. And it's like, oh, okay. There is still hope. I'm hoping to take it in multiple stages. We're going to start measuring speed index in Chrome's reporting back, so Chrome can at least have an idea. We have started using speed index in our synthetic testing as a benchmark when we optimize Chrome, for example. So, we obviously track onload and all those other metrics as well. But in the synthetic testing, we run huge batch tests through web page test. And we do a bunch of A/B tests. If we make this change to the scheduler, what does that do to the paint? And we've actually shipped a bunch of scheduler changes that have optimized for the speed index, sometimes at the detriment of onload, because they do get the user experience up faster. And they've been interested in enough and excited enough about being able to record that hopefully we can. I've got a code patch that's just kind of sitting there I need to go finish fixing to start reporting speed index from the RUM data for Chrome's internal histogram reporting. If you go to Chrome/histograms, you can basically see everything that Chrome reports if you opted in to sharing your data for making Chrome better. You can see all of the metrics, and there's all sorts of network timings and everything else that it reports back. And speed index hopefully will be one of those. If we can, sort of phase 2 of that is maybe I can convince people that instead of the paint rects, a single number for speed index measured only until onload, so it's not JavaScript. You can't keep running and changing it and measuring new speed indexes and if you can't do it for an iframe because you're not going to create iframes for the history links that you can then go, hey, this speed index looks faster or slower, so they must have been to this site before. So there's a lot of nuances in there. I'm hoping. That's a long way of saying hopefully sometime. Yeah, sometime. Hopefully soon, but I'm not sure. Hopefully next year at this time I can say it's out there and you can get it. There's Ray, and then I'll hop back. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Actually, for starting from IE10, you do have a way to kind of listen to the start render this type of event, which is, I mean, if you really listen to the start render that event, I forgot the exact name, that would be kind of error prone. But you can really attach to the vsync attribute, which is every time the browser tries to talk to the graphic card or GPU, whatever. Yeah. Say the browser itself, like every 16 milliseconds do something, but it's not necessary. Every 16 milliseconds already talk to the graphic card. So you can really attach to that event and see what is really happening from there. So you can see something like the first vsync could be really probably be the real start render, this type of thing.
Okay, so Ray, who is from Microsoft, so be kind, but was saying that there's a vsync attribute that you can attach to and listen to an event. Is it documented somewhere? Okay. Woohoo, you heard it here. There's a vsync event that IE exposes that you can listen to tell whenever IE actually paints or talks to the graphics card, which could be a good proxy for it. It'll be interesting to look. There's also request animation frame, which will give you callbacks whenever it's going to animate something, although that'll sort of tell you when the next paint would have happened. I haven't done a lot of experimenting there to see if it'll tell you when the first paint happens. And yep, right back there. So the question was, is there much of an overhead in having the onload handlers call performance.mark? No. It's like super, super lightweight. At least the implementation in Chrome, it's like literally recording just that timestamp, adding it to a list, and getting out of the way. It's super easy to polyfill as well. So the user timing stuff, I don't do a whole lot of fancy JavaScript, and I wrote a polyfill. I think I have it on the slide for the user timing stuff. It's literally just an array on the DOM. So it's a really easy way to keep track of stuff. I wouldn't go calling it thousands and thousands of times and it's in a loop, but other than that, and when you performance.mark, if you're rewriting the same one, it's not even going to sort of add to an array. It just overwrites the existing value. So if you're just tracking AFT, you can go performance.mark AFT and just scatter that on everything, and whatever the last one was is the one that's going to win. So up here.
Is there any reliable way to alternate above the fold time with the say DOM complete time okay to directed as a mean to measure it?
So the question was, is there any way to, did you say integrate or estimate? Oh, is there any way to estimate the above the fold time using the DOM interactive or DOM content loaded events? No, unfortunately. So I'm not sure. I know a couple of vendors have exposed an interactive time. I'm not exactly sure what they call, what technical measurement correlates with interactive. I don't know if that is just the ready state or if that's something scrollable on the page or something along those lines. The problem is the DOM content loaded just means the browser's got to the end of the HTML. It may have laid everything out, but images, for example, above the fold images load completely asynchronously to any of the only thing that you do know is the onload event is going to come after everything you care about. Other than that, the DOM content ready or DOM content loaded, I've seen it both ways, can come before or after the above the fold time, depending on when things loaded, images in particular. If you only care about layout and text, DOM content loaded will generally always come after that. But any images, anything like that, all sort of load completely asynchronously, which is why we sort of have the onload handlers attached. One of the other things I didn't sort of document in the slide, but that I did in the GitHub gist that it links to is, in addition to the onload handlers, you can also do a really small inline script with a mark. Let's say you've got a page that's built up from widgets. It's not uncommon if you've got a complex CMS that you don't actually own the full markup. You've got widgets that may or may not appear, and you want to know when those widgets loaded. You can just do an inline script for performance.mark widget X ran at this point in time. And usually an inline script is good enough to tell you that the DOM parser was adding my stuff to the DOM at this point in time. So you can instrument those as well. But it's really, there's no good way without knowing the code of the page, right? So as a provider of tools, like web page test, it would be awesome if I could provide you a way of saying, this is the point in time when all the stuff you cared about loaded. All right, and there's no sort of universally good way to do that, which is why we have sort of the speed index, and we've got a bunch of different implementations of that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, which are our best way to approximate when we think things loaded, to give you a rough way to do like A/B. Just like you can't instrument your partner's sites with RUM, you also can't instrument your partner's JavaScript and onload handlers or your competitors and say, okay, this is when my competitors above the fold images all loaded in your synthetic testing, right? Justin, and then I'll come. No? Okay. Back there. Yes?
Yeah, so I was curious, since you specifically mentioned for mobile testing using real devices, and then also talking about how like really page index is the most important thing, which to my knowledge you can't, like if you're running your own synthetic test, you can't get on your own.
So the question was doing testing on real mobile devices, and you were asking about speed index?
Yeah. Kind of just like what's your thoughts on reconciling those two things?
So you can. There aren't good ways to do it right now. I'll mention that. So in mobile testing is a pain in the ass, to put it bluntly. And I think we've got several sessions here on setting up a mobile lab in a day and running mobile testing. Managing devices is a pain, but also getting information out from mobile devices is a pain in the butt. There are ways to record video with low overhead while doing a mobile test. App Purified does it. We've got an integration with Web Page Test that I think is coming in a demo on Wednesday. And also, so we have various other we've got a node agent that knows how to drive testing on mobile devices that can also record HDMI video capture if you mirror the phone's device out an HDMI port. So you can capture it off device with high frame rate video capture. You know, all of these things start to add to the complexity, as if testing mobile wasn't hard enough. You're now tethering a phone of the small subset of phones that can also do HDMI mirroring while USB data. So like for Android, that's like the Razer Max, and there's like 3 or 4 phones. For iPhones, anything pre-Lightning can go HDMI, but the Lightning connectors can't do data and HDMI at the same time. It's complicated. But you can theoretically capture full lightweight performant video capture of the phone while it's loading and calculate speed index off of that. One of the other things I forgot to mention is we have a way to calculate the speed index off of the paint rects without necessarily needing to capture the video. We can WebKit browsers at least will expose the timeline information. If you haven't played with the dev tools, highly recommend doing it. But they expose the paint information on the timeline, and you get, okay, the browser painted this rectangle at this point in time, and this rectangle at this point in time, and maybe it painted the same rectangle several times if it's doing an animation. We've got a variation of the speed index algorithm that can calculate a reasonably good approximation of the speed index. It actually ends up being better than the video ones in some cases, off of just that paint information, which is actually what we're using for the Chrome field data, because we're not going to be recording video in Chrome. So even just with a USB tethered phone with the timeline data, we can calculate a speed index off of the timeline data we get back, even without having the video. Sorry, probably way too detailed, but. Justin?
Speed curve.
Speed curve.
It's a new.
Yes, so Speed Curve is a commercial offering that's using web page test agents for doing their testing, and they'll trend your performance over time and stuff.
How do you feel about it?
How do I feel about it? I feel great. I mean, so web page test was released on a BSD license intentionally. When I first created it, this was like 2006, I think. We were Keynote customers, and we had built our internal lab to do a bunch of testing at the same time as Keynote. And there were a couple of bugs in what Keynote was doing that were frustrating the crap out of us that we just wanted to give them the code to fix. And it seemed easier to just open source everything we had, point them to the code, and say, hey, you want to do it here? Please take the code, just do it. And we actually want to encourage that. So if anyone wants to take even just rip parts of the code out, do whatever you want, build commercial services on it, re-release it as a commercial product, whatever you'd like, feel free, please go ahead. It's all on GitHub, all on BSD licensed. And anything that can hopefully bring more performance testing and data to the market is a good thing. Yeah, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not a designer. You should see some of the early releases of the web page test. Go look at web page test on the Wayback Archive, the Internet Archive. It's like a white page with 3 radio buttons, and yeah, it's total UI, developer UI. Any other questions? Oh, right here.
Can you please talk about single page, how to test single page application built on Ajax?
Okay, how to test single-page applications built on Ajax. Yes, sorry. Unfortunately, a lot of what I was talking about was like on-load driven and stuff like that. None of that really changes. So with single-page apps, you either have WebDriver or something else that can drive it and do the automation of what you want to do through Ajax. Web page test, for example, it's got a scripting capability. If you go into the advanced settings script tab, and you can do things like login, you can push buttons, you can tell it what parts of the navigation you want to measure. And pretty much all of the commercial services have a flavor of that to some extent. Nothing really changes other than knowing the timing for that, the duration of what you're trying to measure can sometimes be complicated, right? It's like, you know the start event of what you want to trigger. It's how do you know when it's done? And how do you measure to that point? And that's usually in that case, you're a lot better off if you can instrument it in the app itself and then just collect the data like the user timing data back out from the app. You can watch for things to change on the DOM, wait for something to show up. Those tend to be kind of expensive because you're generally polling the DOM looking for something. Does that help? I mean, the single-page apps, they're more complicated because it's not just drop an URL in and go, but it is usually drop an URL in and then either execute a bunch of script to interact with the page or fill in a bunch of form fields and click a bunch of buttons. And web page test has its own language. The newer agents that we have for mobile, the Node.js agent, if you've played with any of the code, can actually take WebDriver scripts like Selenium JS scripts and run those. Usually whatever you use for functional testing, you can hopefully leverage and collect your performance data from it as well.
So is the agent only support mobile?